Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. Today, we're going to be looking at NoteBuilder in Advanced, and in particular, this is an introductory webinar. So you've got myself on the call today, Georgina Abfield. I'm one of the Education and Media Technicians here at Caseware UK. And then we've got Phil Reeves, one of our Senior Professional Services Consultants. He's going to be taking you through the main presentation today, and I will be monitoring questions as they come in. So to log a question then, if you use the Q&A field at the bottom of the Zoom panel, and we will look to add a Q&A session at the end of today's webinar, and we can pose your questions to Phil. So I'm now going to hand you over to Phil, and he's going to talk you through the agenda.
Yes, thank you, Georgie. Hopefully you can see me and hear me. Yeah, thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. As Georgie mentioned, today's webinar is an introductory webinar on the Note Builder tool. So we're going to be going through some of the basics using an example note that we're going to build into the software, into the Note Builder tool. You can see the agenda on the screen. I won't run through that point by point because I'm sure you can all decipher what we're going to go through as we get through this webinar. Lots of information to go through, some best practice suggestions, some recommendations as we go through, how we can make it easier when we're building these notes, as I say, as we go through the software. So if anyone does have any questions, please feel free to ask. We do have other previous Note Builder webinars that we've done as well, but on different examples. So we like to use a different example for each of the webinars that we do. So if you want to see some other examples of notes that we can build within the Note Builder tool, please feel free, as Georgie will point out at the end of the webinar, where you can find some of our other webinars that we've done, including the other Note Builder ones that we've done in the past. So what I'll do at this stage is I will quickly just go over to share my screen, and we'll start with the content. I'll just replace the screen share number 2. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. Good. So yeah, first thing we need to do before we get into Note Builder is have an understanding of why we're building notes and what we need to do, the hows essentially, that we need to know to build these notes into the Note Builder tool. So we need to know where we need to access the Note Builder tool, how we build that content, how we then populate that content, and then ultimately how we share that content with other users and incorporate those into our financial statements. So once you get an understanding of those, again, the Note Builder tool is there for any sort of content that Caseware doesn't provide as a default in terms of, again, Caseware will have the minimum disclosure, but you want to change slightly the disclosure that's being included. So you don't like the way that Caseware is disclosing a certain piece of information, so you want to adjust that, then you can do using the Note Builder tool. The other thing that we can use it for is, as I say, for creating that content that then is able to be shared across different sets of financial statements. The main reason for the Note Builder tool being introduced is that previously we'd need to build a note each time we access a set of financial statements using the add button that you have hopefully seen on the toolbar, adding in the notes each time. And then we'd have to go to another set of accounts and rebuild that same note again. Whereas now what we're able to do is we're able to build that note once, save that, send it to other people, as I say, and then apply that to multiple sets of accounts, regardless of the financial statement type, FRS 101, 102, 105, IFRS, charities, academies. We can apply a Note Builder note into any template that has been built onto the Accounts Advanced software. So we'll have a look at how we get into it. We'll run through our example. And then, as I say, if there's questions as we go through, then please feel free to ask. First things first, locating Note Builder. So apologies for this screen being relatively small. Let me zoom in a bit. There we go. Hopefully you can see that a little bit clearer. So Note Builder itself can be accessed from within working papers or more likely from within the financial statements. If you're in working papers, the easiest way to access it is via the Other Docs tab on the right-hand side and go into the Note Builder option here. Alternatively, we can use the search bar that's available on the top toolbar. We can type in Note Builder, and that will search for the Note Builder tool. Essentially, the Note Builder is a HTML file that's built into the installation path of Caseware. So it's launching outside of the financial statements, which is an important thing to note because that's how we're able to then build that into those notes that we create into multiple sets of accounts. If you're in your accounts document, as I am now, we can go to the Note tab on the toolbar and we can access our Note Builder tool using the Create button on, as you can see here, quite clearly, the purple icon. So instead of using, as some people may have done in the past, the Add button to add in extra notes, we're using the Create button instead. As I say, that will launch the Note Builder outside of the accounts document. So it's a separate tab on our taskbar at the bottom. I'll zoom in again a bit just to hopefully everyone can see that nice and clearly. So instead of accessing it within the accounts, we now have at the bottom of my screen 2 separate tabs, one for Note Builder and one for the accounts document. Now, obviously, now we've located, we need to then start to look to build our content into Note Builder. There's a couple of different options that we have, and we'll run through those I won't go, oh, this button does this button does that, because again, yeah, you can have a look at each, or when you're building your notes, to see all the different options that you have. But we're going to look at it from a practical scenario. Now, the note we're going to look to build, if I just bring this over to the screen so you can see it, it's quite a basic one, but we're going to do like a split of admin expenses. So here's one I made earlier in pure Blue Peter fashion. And we're going to look to build some elements of this. Again, in terms of time and the process, I won't build everything, because once you get the hint of how one line works, you'll get the hint of how the rest of the note gets built. But just give you some hints and tips and best practices if we're building a note like this. So first things first. And again, talking about steps, the first step we always follow when we access the Note Builder tool, the first thing you always want to do is save that note. It sounds pretty strange to be saving something at the start as opposed to doing it at the end. But the reason for that is this save button at the top on the toolbar, or if I go to File and I go to the save option that we would use here, doesn't work in Note Builder initially until we've gone and actually saved this as the custom note that we're creating. And to do that, we need to use the KL button. So we go to the KL button and we press save. That will then pop up this window here, which will allow us to enter the file name of the file that we are creating. So I will call this admin expenses. And then we'll click OK, and that will save our note. Now, the reason why we do this first is now if I was to close the Note Builder tool, Caseware will give me a prompt to say, okay, well, you need to make sure you save this. And if I just press the save button that would appear in that prompt, it will then save to that knowledge library. Whereas if I just press save like this, it will say that this document may not save to changes because we haven't gone through and used the right save button within the KL option first. What this will show us at the top as well is where that file is saved in the path that we're using for Caseware, which again is an important thing to note when we want to distribute and share this with other users, because we need to go and access this note, and we'll do that at the end of this process. And then I'll show you how you can, the easy ways of sharing that across to other users. So KL, important one to access. We can also use this to load in existing notes that we've created in the past. If I go to load, I can see I've got my admin expenses and a completed version, which I created, again, which we may see a little bit later on in this webinar. Now, once we've done that, our next thing to look at is, again, there's a good process that we can follow when we are creating these Note Builder notes. We will save the note, then we'll build what we want to build, the layout of the note, the style, the table structure of the note, and then we look to populate the note. So sort of a 3-stage approach. And then almost like the 4th stage is that fine tweaking, the detailed element of it. So, you know, things like chucking the user text in, adding the title and things like that. Again, I would worry about more towards the end. So when we're looking to build that structure for our Note Builder note, Caseware's got a number of default profiles that we've created for you to assist with creating these notes. So in the profiles option here, the profile is essentially a table layout that is built into Caseware. So we have got one profile at the moment in this file, but if I go to profile and go to new, I'll have another profile being loaded in. Now, these profiles could be separate notes. So this could be the first note we build, this could be the second note we build. And then we could have multiple, and we could have all of the notes that we're building within one knowledge library folder or one knowledge library file. This could alternatively be separate tables within the same note. So this could be, again, say for the sake of argument, we're building a multi-table note within. So our admin expenses, if we want to split that between two different tables, we could do that using this process here, having two separate profiles. For this example, we're just going to use one profile, so I'll delete the second one. Now, the profile itself, as I say, by default, you get a 2-column, 2-row table. And we can go through and we can use some of the tools within Caseware to add additional columns and rows just based upon this. Obviously useful if we're building like a, say we've got a 6-column text note, we could build that structure within the Note Builder tool. And the benefit really of Note Builder is that we can build whatever we want. We can have 10 columns, 6 columns, 8 columns, 3 columns, 4 columns. It really doesn't matter. It's up to you what you're trying to produce within the software. So to access, and as I say, what Caseware is available to us, if we go to the profiles option and go to load, is some layouts that we may wish to use in this process. So as you can see on the screen, I'll make that full screen for everyone. Actually, I'll leave it like this. It's a little bit clearer. We've got profile number 1, which is a fixed asset layout. Profile number 2, which is group and company. Profile number 3, which is a SOCI style note. There's 3 that are for charity specific. And then there's a standard 2-column table and a subsidiary undertakings table. So if you're trying to produce any notes that meet any of the layouts that you can see, just load in that profile and use that as the basis for the note you're creating. So what we can also do as well is when we're producing these notes and we're building these notes, if we have to build, for example, as I say, a 3-column table, and then we know we need that table again. So it might be that we've got current year, prior year, and then some kind of variance, either a percentage or a difference difference column as well. We could, and then say we needed that again, we can also save any profiles that we've created as profiles in this list. And then we would be able to go through and load that into another note in the future. So all profiles are also saved into a very similar installation path to the one that you can see our note is saved into at the top. So in this example, we're going to load in a Caseware standard 2-column table, because again, our note that we're building, just to bring back that example, is just a 2-column table, current year and prior year. And what you can see is that will follow the standard layout of a table that you can see within the financial statements. The good thing about using this profile is that we don't have to worry about headings at the top, the current year and prior year headings. We don't need to worry about the pound signs because they're already included on the table. The other benefit of this is that when we build and use, again, the way that this is built with the current year figures and the prior year figures matching the styles, we don't need to worry about changing the styles on these particular columns. And also, if the numbers are going to be rounded to thousands, if we populate them from some of the areas that we'll see later on, where we populate potentially from mapping or from account numbers, then the numbers will also round automatically using this table layout. Now, in our example, if I bring that back up, we have got a split of, we've gone and split them out a bit to show you some of the functionality on the tool. We've got staff and directors' costs, depreciation, amortization, other admin expenses, and then establishment expenses. As I say, we probably won't get all the way down to some of these options, but we'll focus on the top half. We'll see how far we get through. Again, I really want to focus on the functionality as opposed to, this is how we insert a row. This is how we insert another row, because you'll see it in a minute anyway. So as I say, first thing we focus on is the structure of the note that we're building. So we've got a heading at the top, then we've got 3 rows, then we've got a total, then we've got like a space, then we've got another heading row, and then additional 3 rows. So we can look to build that structure in. Now, first things first, we can insert as many rows as we want into the Note Builder tool. We can insert, as I say, as many columns, and we can configure how rows will appear using the configure option here. If I'm building this, the first thing I would usually do is get an idea of where I want things to go and what kind of layout I need. So I'm going to go staff and directors costs, put that heading in. Then I'm going to say, so we've got staff costs, we've got directors costs, and we've got pension costs. Then underneath that, we're going to have a subtotal, then our space, then we've got our the start of our depreciation and amortization section. Now, we obviously don't have enough rows at the moment for the table that we're looking to build. So we can go to the configure option. And as you can see on the screen, there are a number of different configuration options that we have within the Note Builder tool. We can go through and we can select a number of different cells, and we can configure cells at the same time. We can go through and we can insert and delete rows if we want to. We can insert and delete columns. We can manage subtotals, or we can roll forward and set up roll forwards. So we'll go through some of these options. Inserting, deleting rows is pretty self-explanatory. In this example, we need a number of different rows. So we go to insert, delete rows. We would select, in this example, row number 11, and we can insert some additional rows. We'll insert, say, just for the sake of argument, 10 more rows. That'll insert 10 rows. Now, again, best practice approach that we would suggest. One thing I would always say to do when you're building these tables is to leave a blank row at the end of the table. So if I was populating all of these, row 21, I would always leave blank when I'm initially building the table, because when you build a new row, it copies the properties of the row that you select. So if I select a blank row, I insert 10 more rows, I get 10 more blank rows. If I select row number 10, which has depreciation and amortization in it, and I say I want 5 more, I then get 5 rows with the word depreciation and amortization in it, which is fine from this perspective because it's just a heading. But from the perspective of if I've gone through and inserted calculations into here, it's going to replicate that calculation over and over again. And I'm going to need to go through and remove that or tweak that each time, which again is time consuming. Also, when you want to delete these rows, as you're about to see, you can only delete the rows one by one. Now, I'm only deleting these because they've got the word depreciation and amortization in them. If you've got blank rows at the bottom of your table, you don't necessarily need to delete them. Caseware won't print a row if there is no value on that row. So that's inserting and deleting rows. Inserting and deleting columns is exactly the same thing. Just to show you, if I insert a new column, Caseware will put that column to the right-hand side of the column that you have selected. So I selected the 2024 column. That gave me, again, the same column layout, but the only difference is it doesn't give you a subtotal. So any copies of columns will not include a subtotal because Caseware does not want to assume that your new column needs a subtotal in it. Speaking of subtotals, this is an important element where you can look at the key that's provided at the top of the screen. So non-input cells are in white. Let me just delete this column quickly. There we go. So non-input cells are in white, as you can see at the top of the screen. Input cells available in blue. Subtotals are in almost like a sandy orange color that we can see at the bottom. If we're amending a subtotal, it then goes to dark orange. And then the cell we're adding the subtotal to, or the cell that we're adding to the subtotal, I should say, is available in dark blue. Now, when you're using this tool, always just read the guidance that's at the top of the screen. Click on the cell in the below table to select to be the subtotal cell. So if I select here, this is the subtotal cell. Then I can read the guidance, click the cells in the below table to select the cell that sums to the subtotal. So what do I want to add to the subtotal? Or what do I want to remove from the subtotal? So if I remove them and click down here, that removes the subtotal. So you can add and remove rows from subtotals if you want to, as often as you like. Now in this example, I'm going to put a subtotal here. I want a subtotal for my staff and directors' costs, so I can select the cell I want the subtotal in, add the cells to the subtotal, and then confirm it by either selecting the cell again or by pressing this cross up here. Now, in most cases, I would select the cell again because I'm already in the table. I don't have to keep scrolling back up. So I'd select, for example, these 3 cells after selecting the subtotal to be amended and then confirm that there. And now I've got a subtotal that's going to add all these staff costs together. The roll forward option is used if you're going to be inputting figures. So in most cases, ideally, as we'll see in a minute, we want to be populating from mapping where we can. So in that case, we would be more inclined to go through, and if we're populating from mapping, then we don't need to use this roll forward option. But if we're going to have to type balances in, so we haven't got the split that we're doing on our table that we're producing, that split isn't available within the mapping structure, we would be more inclined then to type the balances in, potentially. Then we may use the roll forward cell option, which means that basically what we do is we select the cell we want to roll forward to, select the cell we want to roll forward from, and then reselect the cell we want to roll forward to. And then when we roll forward this file, the balance that I put into staff costs in B5 for the current year will automatically transfer across to C5. What you may also want to do is potentially select, and this is again based on user preference, you might want to select a cell to roll forward to as the current year, and then select a blank cell that will roll forward from, like this one that's not going to have any information in it. And then basically what that will give you is that will give you a blank current year every year after roll forward. But again, that's up to you. Again, in most cases, if you're populating from mapping, you don't need to worry about that option. Now, in our structure here, if I go back to this slide here, we've got underlines here, underline here, underline here. So we've got a number of different underlines that we're using. And we can use some of the tools that are available when we select cells to build those underlines. But what we can also do is we can use the default underline that's already provided within the table. So one of the options that you have, as I mentioned a minute ago, when we create a new cell or a new row, we copy the row that's already been created. So I've already got an underline row. Why don't I just use that again? And I can do that. I'd select this row here, go to insert row, one new row. Now at the bottom, I've got two underline rows, but you can select on the left-hand side and you can drag and drop this to where you want to include it. So it's a very good and easy tool for sorting as well. If I want to sort things up and down, you can do that within Note Builder just by dragging and dropping a row to where you want to put it. So we want to be building a structure of the table that we want. Now, the majority of that structure building is done, as I say, firstly within inserting rows and table or in columns and subtotals, but then also in terms of how it's going to look. So again, going back to our example, we've got a bold row at the top, then we've got our 3 rows, then we've got a subtotal at the bottom. Ideally, I'd probably make this bold, but when I created this, I didn't make this bold, and I'd probably also make these capitals, but again, we can change that as we go through. So we want to make this bold, and we can do that quite easily within Caseware. And again, the reason why I want to make it bold is to make it consistent with the rest of the accounts. The subheadings within the accounts and the subtotals are both in bold. So we can do that. We click here and we click, this is going to be the subtotal. And as you can see, I can select multiple cells at the same time. So I select the cells I want to make bold, press confirm, and then we get our table configuration options, which again, just so we can see them a little bit. There we go. I'll make them so that we got it in a smaller screen. Now, one of the options that we have on here is styles. So if you want to make something bold, you go to the styles option, and there's all sorts of different styles on here. You've got current year figures, prior year figures, which will follow the standard layout of current and prior year figures in the accounts. If you don't want a figure to follow the layout of the standard accounts, then you can use the figures option, which will just give you normal text in the table. You've then got description, which is a row description. You've got current year, prior year dates, current year and prior year currency, pretty self-explanatory. But then down here, you've got the option for a subheader. So if your subheaders in your accounts are bold, then this will be bold. If your subheaders in the accounts are italic for whatever reason, then they'll be italic. If you decided to make your subheaders in your accounts, pink, then this subheader will be pink. So it's ensuring consistency, which is the one thing we want to be doing when we're using the Note Builder tool. So we'll go subheader. And then when we go and save this in a minute by pressing confirm, that will make that row a subheader. Now, one thing that people need to get used to when they're using the Note Builder tool is if you need to make another change to the note, don't press confirm. Go back to the top, press table configure, deselect the cells you've selected, and then you can start to configure something else. If you press confirm, it closes. If I go to confirm here, it closes the window. And then if I need to make another change, I need to reopen it, which can be slightly frustrating. So in this case, what I'll do is I'll say, actually, I want to make these non-input. And also, if you look on the right-hand side at the moment, this heading row has dashes, which we wouldn't see usually for blank for 0 rows on headings within the Caseware software. So I'll go to these two and I'll go to confirm. And another option that we have on here is to go through display zeros and change that to blank. We can also turn the input off if we want to. So it's always good to have a look at some of these options. You've got styles, as we've said. You've got the option to include underlines. If you want to include an underline on any of these rows, you can do. We've got the option to change the settings of a cell. So cell types as alphanumeric, numeric, or date. So numeric cell for a number, an alphanumeric cell for text, a date cell, obviously, for a date. And there's lots of other different reasons and options and examples of where we might use these options. So again, when you're building, a lot of the configuration is done from within here. Now, other things we can do when we're talking about styles, I said I wanted a space between our total and our row here. So we can do that as well. If I select the 3 cells, I can also just select the entire row on the left-hand side, press confirm. I'll have the option in here to go through, and in the styles, I can say, as well as all the ones I mentioned previously, at the bottom, we've got the option for a spacer, which is basically just makes a nice little space between the row that's going to be populated and our next row. Obviously, we can just leave it as a full row if we want to, but just by including a spacer, again, it's just another option for a slightly smaller gap than a whole row space. If we do this, we also want to make sure we change the display zeros to be blank. Then we press confirm. I'm happy with the changes I've made so far. Press confirm, and that then applies those changes. Obviously, I also want to make this bold in a minute. I want to remove these, but I can do that in a second. Now, at this stage, if I go to print preview on here, the only thing that prints is my 2024 header and the underlines. Doesn't look great because there's no row descriptions. None of the rows are pulling through. Even that heading row that I've done doesn't pull through. And the reason for that is that in the Note Builder tool, the rows are developed and built to only show when there is a balance populating them. So if there's a number in here, the row prints. As you can see, the text turns black. That means the row's printing. This row here, though, if we look at staff and direct costs, our heading row, is never going to have a value in here because 1, we turn the input off, and 2 is a heading row. So why are we going to have a value in there? So you're probably thinking, well, that means that row is never going to print. And that is true by default. But what you can do is you can use these table skip options at the top to then print that row. So we press here, and that will print that row accordingly. So now when I go to print preview, that row will print. There are 3 options when it comes to the row button. The first one is to skip if 0 values, which is always the default. The second is to print, which, as you can see, it will print if I press it once. The next option, if I select it again, is to skip. And then if I press that again, it will be skip if 0 values. So it cycles through those 3 options. So sometimes if I click this again, you'll see I'll need to click it twice more for that row to pull through. So if I press it once, nothing will happen. If I press it again, then that row will come back through. So you will need to cycle through those options in some instances to get the right one to show. But as I say, the default is always skip if 0 values. So once you've started to build the structure of your note, again, let me just chuck a couple more lines in, just to give you an idea of some of the ease of using this. If I make that one blank and I'll go and make that bold, you can see it's really very much down to just getting comfortable with using the tool more than anything. We'll just go and bung another underline row in here, and we'll drag that down to there. One below that. We'll create another subtotal. There we go, and then we'll make that bold as well. Again, a lot of this just comes with using the software, practice of building the notes into the software. So now we've got the basis of the start of our note. We'll pull that through, and we've got depreciation and the staff costs coming through now. Again, usually I'd build the rest, but just for the sake of this, I'll show you this process. So once we've got the structure of our note, or in this case, the first part of our note, we now look to populate this. Now, the easiest way to populate any note in Note Builder is probably via input. You just type the balances into the input cell. But that means that if we change the note, then we need to replace that balance. We need to overtype it again. Also, when you're building a note within Note Builder, you're building a template, essentially, a structure of a note that you can use in any file across any template. So if you're typing in balances and you're going to use this in 50 different files, that note or that cell there, if you type a balance in on the Note Builder tool, that same balance will come through every single time, which means you'll have to just keep replacing that every single time you build into a different set of accounts. So if you're going to use it as an input table purely, then leave the cells blank in the Note Builder tool and insert the numbers on the face of the accounts. Our most recommended method of populating these rows is via the calculation option, where you'll be able to select a cell and populate via mapping. Now, what you'll notice on here is that this window looks very similar. The opening window that we can see looks very similar to configure. You can do all the same things at the top as we've just mentioned. The main difference is, though, when we're actually configuring or adjusting the calculation, we can only select one cell at a time. Whereas in the configure, we could have selected entire columns, entire rows, the entire table if we wanted to. So in this case, we need to do these manually, one at a time, essentially. So we want to start with staff costs. Or actually, we'll start with pension costs. We'll go and work our way up, so I can show you some of the different options. Then we can press confirm. So we want to put the current year pension cost balance in. Actually, no, we'll start with staff costs. It's easier. We're at the top. And we'll press confirm. Now, what that will do is it will load a list of, or this screen here, which shows all the map codes that are available in the file, regardless of whether they're populated or not. So if we've had to create any custom map numbers on the face of the working or within the working papers, they will also be listed on this screen. In this case, we don't need to create any custom map numbers. We've got a map number for staff costs that is in the R codes. So we go to R and we use this search function at the top to search for the map number. We can search for map descriptions as well using the search here. Now, when I put R in, it's going to show me all of the R codes if I cycle through these options, all the R codes at the top level. So if you're aware of the mapping structure, you know that it works through a hierarchy, starting at level 1 all the way down to the full 9 characters. And we can split that, or we can show this screen based on either the full level or all the way up to level 1. So at the moment, we're showing level 1, which will show just the top level R01 code, R02, R03. If we go to level 2, then it will show us the split within each of those levels. So R01, 81, for example. And if we go down to the full level, it will show us the full mapping structure. Now, in this case, we are looking at staff costs. So we can select the staff cost line. And ideally, when you're doing this, you want to select what you want to populate the cell with, just so you reduce the number of clicks you need to do. So we want to select the admin costs, the staff costs, or the admin staff costs, and we want to do the current year figure. So if I select the current year figure, Caseware will assume at this stage that that is the balance I want to insert. So we can say, right, you can change this if you want to. If you actually wanted a prior year, you can select prior year. But ultimately, I want current year, so I press yes, confirm this. And at the bottom on our calculation field is slightly small. We can see that the map number is pulling through map YR0, R02, and then you might not be able to see this, but there is an asterisk there, which means anything inside of that code. So we can start to create a calculation that we want to populate this cell with. Now, if I do this and just leave it, what we'll find is that staff costs actually also incorporates pension costs. So as I say, we can build a structure of a calculation in here. I could go into different levels, go down to level 2, right? I want R02 because I'm looking at staff costs, and there we've got pension costs. So I actually want to remove this balance from the calculation. So I can do that if I want to. I can select R02 82. I can subtract, press confirm, and now our calculation is everything in R02 except for the pension cost for the staff. Now, when we want to do prior year, copy the calculation, go to your prior year, paste the calculation in, and this YR0 element indicates that this is current year. So if you change that to YR 1 and this to YR1, then that will now pick up the prior year figures. You could go through the process of selecting the cells again, but it's much quicker just to copy the calculation and change that element of the calculation to pick up the prior year instead. And then we just repeat the process for director's cost. So we got director's cost is R01. So we want the total director's cost, and then we want to subtract the director's pension. And that is our calculation. So we copy that for the prior year. We change YR0 to YR1. If you want prior year 2, that's obviously YR2. And then for our pension costs, we just go and add the pension costs together. So we got Y01 85, and then R02 82. We add them together, copy that, and put that into there. And we would build our structure of our table that way. So when I press confirm to save that, you can see these numbers start to pull through. Now our subtotal at the bottom doesn't add anything at the moment, but we could make that a total total to add in all of the other subtotals that we've got in the table. For now, I'll call this total staff and directors costs. Okay. And we could do a similar thing for depreciation. Now, and again, I'll use in most cases in this example, all of these codes can be pulled from mapping. But just for the sake of demonstration very quickly, say, for example, I want to pull through just one element of depreciation, admin depreciation. And I don't have the split, as I said, within the mapping structure to do so. What I can do is instead of picking up from a map number, you can also pick these up from an account number. So if you go back into working papers and say we've got an account number that we want to pick up, we'll use for the sake of argument, let's sort this by map number. Go down to the R50 code. Say, for example, I want to pick up this code here, R805. Now, we got one for the parent and we got one for the subsidiary because we're using a consolidated file today. Instead of picking up from a map number, we can actually change this to be ACT, which stands for account number. And then instead of picking up as R50, we can replace this calculation, put our account number in, and you can actually pick up a row directly from an account number instead. So if I press copy to that, oh, that was in the wrong cell. Let's cut that quickly and we'll go and put that in the right cell. And we can go through and say, actually, we want to populate this as the current year, and then we want to populate this as the prior year. So if you have ACT at the start and then put the account number in as the second part of the calculation, that will pick up as the account number as opposed to picking up from the map number. When I press confirm to this, these balances are pulling through as this line and this line. So these two codes here added together gives us our balance. So we can pull it from account numbers as well if you want to. And now the other thing you can do in the calculation option is you can pull the description directly in as well. So if I want to pull the description from the mapping structure, I can do, and that is especially useful if I've gone through and populated this directly from, or if I've adjusted the map description at all within the assign mapping screen. The last thing we need to do when we build this, once we've gone through and added all our rows in, is just bring through a title. So we select the title row, we go to the title option up here, and we simply press on the cell and we type in our title. And then once we're done, we go to KL, we save that, and we save that again as a option. The only thing I would say at this stage as well is one thing that will catch people out sometimes is if you put a spacer row in here, in the same way I did with the headings, your spacer row you also want to print by pressing on the row button here. So that will also then put the spacer in. If I go to print preview, you can see that's now put the space in. Whereas before, it would have looked like this. So that's right on top of each other, which obviously doesn't look great. Now, if I go to the one I made earlier, here's one I made earlier. So we can continue to build our rows in the same process, populate them from mapping. And eventually we'll end up with hopefully an example that looks like this. And that total cross-references with our accounts. Now, as I said earlier, that saves into this path here, which if I go into my file explorer, and I'll just bring that across to the main screen. Bear with me 1 second. So I'm in the caseware installation path. Oh, I won't zoom in because I've just made everything bigger. In here, we can go to the resources folder, we can go to knowledge library, and we can go to custom. And it's in this custom folder path here, which we can make available to you if you want, that any custom content is saved. Now, to distribute this, all you need to do is send it via email or put it into a shared path, and other people will be able to access that. Now, if you send it via email, they'll need to take a copy of that and put it back into this same resources knowledge library custom file path. Once they've done that, they'll be able to build that into their accounts as well. To build it into your accounts, there's one step that you just need to make sure you follow, and that is to check for updates. Now, to check for updates, you can either close and reopen the accounts, or you can go to the Tools tab on the toolbar, and you can go to KL Update here. Now, the reason why you have to check for updates is because at the moment, Caseware in the accounts is unaware that that note exists. Now, I've left some updates in because I know that a lot of users don't like to take updates when they're mid-file. That's absolutely fine. You don't need to take any updates at all. You just need to check for them in order for this process to go through. So we're checking for updates so that Caseware is aware that that note exists within the knowledge library path. So once we check for updates, we've built our note, we check for updates, we can now build it into our file. To do that, we select the note above where we want to insert it. So I want it beneath turnover. So I go to the Note tab on the toolbar. I go to the Add button. And on the Add button, there is a user-defined list, which is for any custom notes that get created. And in here, I can see both the one I started and the one I finished. And I can choose what note I want to add in. Once you add that note in, that will be available within this set of accounts, so you can make amendments that are based just on this set. If you click on the table and go to the Table tab on the toolbar, you get all the same options that you get within the Note Builder tool. So we can change this just on the face of the accounts. That won't affect the Note Builder. This will just make changes on this set of accounts. If you find that you want to go and make a change to this, you can always go back to Note Builder, make amendments and reload it into the accounts if you want to. Okay. And just finally, before we go to questions, the last thing you can do is if you made a Note Builder note, if we go back to our statement, we can cross-reference that using the note references as well. I can right-click here, go to Modify Note Reference, scroll down the list, and it will always be under the word Custom. So Custom NB Admin Expenses, click OK, and that will allow me to reference to my Note Builder note as well. So lots of different options, lots of different types of notes and examples of notes you can build in the Note Builder tool. Again, it really just depends. A lot of it's going to be down to practice. You know, the admin expenses completed one took me, a little bit longer than we saw when I was building the example, because obviously I wasn't explaining everything. But you can build all sorts of different notes. There's examples that we got on our from other webinars of like right of use assets. There's also an example of a key performance indicators note that we've built. So if anyone wants has any questions of how they build any notes, then feel free to get in touch with us. I'll now pass back to Georgie for any questions that we've got. Georgie, over to you.
Perfect,
I'll
thank
stop
you.
sharing so you can share your screen.
So we did have one come in just at the point where you was adding those calculations in there, Phil. And the question is, can you use the roll forward function instead of typing the formula again?
So that is that in terms of if you're populating the calculation in the field, I'd imagine. The roll forward option only works after the roll forward process. So if you put a calculation into the current year and then want to automatically transfer that to the prior year, then that will work from a roll forward perspective, but in the actual current year file, it wouldn't put anything into the prior year. So it only works from the roll forward function. You would need to type that formula in twice. I think that answers the question.
Okay, thank you. Another question, can you build Note Builder within the strategic report sections?
Yes, very good question. So if I just take well, I'll allow multiple screen shares so we can go back to Georgie in a second. Yeah, if you're in Note Builder, obviously notes that are in the strategic report don't have the indents on them. There's an indent button up here, so we can remove the indent. The only thing that really gets affected is the heading. But in the case of building a table within the strategic report, I would hide the heading, and then I would use one of the default headings that's already available within the accounts. So if I was building like a key performance indicators, I would use this key performance indicators header, build my table underneath that, just by building the note builder note in and not having the indent in there. There is an example of that in one of the other webinars that we've done on Note Builder, which we can send across to you after the call.
Perfect. Thank you very much. That was everything in the way of questions. If you do have any more, then do feel free to log those until the end of the webinar, and we'll be able to get back to you later today or tomorrow. Perfect. Okay, so upcoming webinars then. So we do have another webinar next week on ESG reporting, and also we've got some schedules into the new year as well. So all of the agendas can be looked at, and you can register for those over on that website on screen there. We do have a YouTube channel as well, so all of our quick vids are placed onto our YouTube channel, and a recording of this webinar today will be placed on there. We do appreciate that in some cases IT do block YouTube, so the recording of today's webinar will also be placed onto our knowledge base as well. So you have got our knowledge base on screen there. And just to mention, we do have a Note Builder Advanced Getting Started guide. So alongside the webinar that Phil has run through today, you can take a look at our Getting Started guide on our knowledge base and use that to help you and guide you through creating Note Builder content. Perfect. Okay, so that concludes today's webinar. Thank you for attending. Thank you for the questions. I can see a couple have come in, so we will look to get back to you, and we'll look to include a Q&A handout on the webinar recording as well, so everybody else can take a look at those questions as well if they may be relevant to them. So thank you for attending today, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.